morning, everybody. So the topic for my today's talk is arguing back. I know it's a very much talked about topic. That is why I have picked it up. Let me begin with a story. Let me take you all to 7th century BC in the court of great mighty King Janaka. The court is filled with sages, thinkers, philosophers who are debating. Yajnavalkya is one of the most renowned of them. Everybody is asking questions from Yajnavalkya. But there comes a woman debater named Gandhi who questions Yajnavalkya on futility of marriage and love. Why get married? Why fall in love? Isn't it curtailment of our freedom? Why get tied down? I know these questions are so much relevant even today for the Tinder generation sitting in front. So Yajnavalkya listened to Gandhi, but I am not going to tell you what he answered, because I want to draw your attention to 3 more important things here. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, a woman debater. Yes, you heard it right. Secondly, arguing about futility of marriage and love. And third, in 7th century India. What do we understand from this? What I understand from this is that arguments have shaped the discourse of our history. Our history is so much about people arguing. This is Gandhi and Yajnavalkya. Even Amartya Sen, in his argumentative division, talks about the great tradition of public debate that we've had in India. In the ancient times, debating was a tool to educate people. It was a tool to make strategic decisions of mighty empires. I don't know if most of you know or not, but Indian logic, which is the Katha Shastra, and the Darshan Shastra, which is Indian philosophy, have their rockbeds in debating, in arguments. So much so that even Greek civilization, the democracy in Greek civilization, could flourish only because of the myths that they had, where they had public debates. This is the Jainism. Jainism is a religion which is again right now flourishing. They have a theory called Anekantvad. Anekantvad means no one perspectiveness, which means maybe Aditya here, maybe me here, maybe Sir there. Anybody's perspective can have some kind of validity and truth. And when we discuss, or when we rather argue all these perspectives, then we reach to the truth that we are aiming to reach. 4 Buddhist councils have happened. And what happened in those councils? Debates around the philosophy of Buddhism. If Nelson Mandela would not have argued, if Gandhi would not have argued, if Rosa Parks would not have argued, how would have our world been? We would not have had a black American president. Maybe India would not have been free. Maybe the Mars orbiter mission that we recently launched would have been launched keeping Sun at the center of the universe. And mom would have been confused. Mom is Mars orbiter mission. Would have been confused certainly. So because all these people argue, that is why the history could take the shape that we see it is taking today. Ladies and gentlemen, this culture of debating today is at a very low level. Why do I say that? You can see it's at a very low level. I say it because the debates today are only limited to raucous media houses where media persons are only debating, talking to themselves and not listening to anybody. Or it is limited to MPs who are again talking only to get re-elected. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a debater. I have won more than 1,000 debates, nationally and internationally. Worked with around 300 renowned institutions, done some hundreds of workshops, worked with thousands of students and global corporate leaders. But I want to share an interesting story with you, which I find is the essence of my journey. I was in Sindhya School Boys Gwalior once, conducting a debating workshop for students from 6th to 12th standard. And as a trainer, when you walk in the room, you generally want to know what kind of audience do you have. Like I know most of you here are engineers. So the moment I entered, my first question was, how many of you here have won more than 100 debates? One student who was in 6th standard, a tiny little boy named Ayush, walked up to me and said, "Ma'am, I have won more than 100 debates." I said, "Have you even done 100 debates?" He said, "Yes, ma'am, I debate with my father every day." Now that is the kind of debating culture I am talking about. That is the kind of debating culture that I approve of. Ladies and gentlemen, all of you here must have been often told, don't argue. Arguing is not good. Good girls don't argue. Why do you argue so much? Why do you think that happens? Why are we stopped from arguing? Unfortunately, but certainly, in this world of Facebook and Twitter, arguments have definitely taken some nasty turns. But should that refrain us from arguing? Agreed, there is information overload. Agreed, sometimes arguments do get bad. Agreed, there is chaos. But today, in MNNIT, aren't we here to embrace the chaos? So, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you some myths that are there about arguing. I am going to burst these 6 myths about argument. First myth about argument is, if you argue with somebody, they think that you are their enemy. So let's imagine you are on a date, and in first 5 minutes, you have an argument. What is going to happen? The date turns out to be the last date that you're ever going to have with the same person. But is that healthy? Psychologists also claim that disagreements are opportunities for relationships to grow. And imagine if you have a partner with whom you can talk about anything at any end of spectrum. Isn't that a comfort? Or on the other hand, you have a partner who says yes to everything. Want to have a pizza? Yes. Want to go for a movie night? Yes. Want to go to Maldives? Yes. Shall I replace you with Alexa? Yes. Replace me with Alexa. That is what it is about. Now, the other myths that I'm going to talk about here. Okay. Second one is, if you're arguing with somebody, they feel that you're challenging their authority. I am a teacher. There are so many esteemed teachers here. But it happens most of the time that when we either argue with our father, elders, teachers, they think that we are challenging their authority. That's a myth. Why? Because we are not actually challenging their authority. Because if your argument is backed by logic, if it is backed by evidence, then your authority is not being challenged. Only if you associate your self-esteem to the argument, then your authority is challenged. I get reminded of yet another experience of my life in this. I was a nerdy student, of course, wearing specs, good at academics, good dancer, debater, good at dramatics. My teachers would be very happy with me entire year. But only on the PTM, they would call my parents and have one complaint. I hope you all can guess what that would be. That I argue a lot. Now, how can that be a complaint? I fail to get it. The third myth that I'm going to burst about arguing is, to argue, you need confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, to argue, you don't need confidence. People who don't let you argue are rather the ones who are insecure about their own belief system. Now, imagine if there is a thought process. You challenge it. If you challenge it well and it stands the test of your challenge, then it gets strengthened. And if it doesn't get strengthened or if you lose, then it gets replaced. It is as simple as that. Also, people feel that arguing is only for extroverts. However, arguing is not only for extroverts, it's for introverts as well. Why do I say this? Because arguing is the very essence of every human being. I feel, or the way I look at it is that human progression is about human progression in arguing, in questioning, in challenging the belief systems. Just imagine the terrible day of your death when everybody would be speaking and you will not be able to argue back. I am not the only one saying it. Raja Ram Mohan Roy also said it. And I believe that today also we are just living our dreams. Because today, tomorrow and until the day we die, you are not arguing back. That's me as head girl, just wanted to lighten the mood and show. The fourth myth that we have around arguing is that arguing is wasted of time and energy. Now, if you have to learn anything, if you have to learn multiple perspectives, you are going to need time and you are going to need energy. So, arguing is not wasted of your time and energy, rather, it's an investment that you are making. The time that you invest arguing is the time that you invest in learning. How about looking at it like that? Then the fifth myth that we have is that argument breeds conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, argument doesn't breed conflict. The sense of emotion that you associate with the argument is what breeds conflict. Argument is rather a better way to have a dialogue and talk about things and move over them. The last myth that we have about arguing is, if you are arguing, you are egoist. I think it's the opposite. If you're arguing, that means you're open to listening to others. That means you're empathetic to their opinion. That makes you liberal. That makes you humble. So if you're arguing, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're. Now, why are we not arguing? That's the question that everybody in the house has. We are not arguing because our ability to question as a species is diminished. That is what I feel. We as academicians talk about IQ, which is your intellectual question. We talk about EQ, which is your emotional question. But how about the QQ, which is your questioning question? Imagine if students could get marks to ask questions rather than just to write answers by mugging them up. Maybe it would happen. Then somebody argued. Okay, so what are the benefits of debate? Ladies and gentlemen, if I tell you that debating can add to your fitness, how would you feel? A study by Impact has shown the association of suppression of arguments to physical pain. If you suppress your arguments, you tend to have physical pain. Now please don't confuse argument with fighting. I'm not talking about fighting here. I'm talking about arguing. And for the rest of the benefits, I have summed them up into 5 C's. These 5 C's are culture of communication. Of course, if you're able to argue well, you get a culture to communicate, where you are able to understand others and others are able to understand you. It breeds creative mindset, critical thinking, which is the most important thing that is missing in our curriculums today. How are we encouraging critical thinking? Aren't we missing on the critical inquiry part? Any research, any probe has its basis in critical. Civic awareness. Knowing who is doing what, why, is very important. Even Marx talks about it. Marx talks about dialectism, which is there is one thought which is thesis, the other thought that is antithesis, and when they two meet, then there is synthesis. Collaborative environment. This is what you get when you debate. You breed a collaborative environment. It just becomes a routine when you. Now, about the usefulness of debate, there was a study conducted in the Ibn South Islamic College of Medicine, where students of medicine for 2 weeks were only taught through debate. And he saw that gains were given. 69% of them felt that they were more efficient. 78% of course thought that it's a book. 61% also thought that they are learning effectively about the controversial issues. And in medical profession, controversial issues are faced every day. Ethical dilemmas are routine of medical profession. 59% felt that they had the enhanced ability to analyze. And 75%, please read this line very importantly, thought that there is increased tolerance to various viewpoints. So debating basically leads us to create a more tolerant environment, which we are badly in need of. Let me tell you about a road trip that I took 2 years back from Delhi to Bhutan. I know it sounds crazy, but on New Year's Eve I was in Bhutan, and there I observed one very interesting thing. Monks, who are the proponents of science, learn through debate. That's how they sharpen their mind. That's how they increase their focus. That's how they get mental clarity. And how do they debate? In a very interesting fashion. There are 2 parties. One is defender and the other is challenger. But here the defender is not the one who is wiser or who knows more. Defender is the one who knows less. So that the challenger who is asking questions can also clear their own misconceptions. They clap, then they have to punctuate. Their right hand is symbol of control and their left hand is symbol of wisdom. So when they two come together, that is what debating is all. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to be guarded. You don't have to be flattered to argue for yourself. I am 9th girl child, born in Panipat, Haryana, infamous for its huge sexuation. I'm sure my mother would have argued. I'm sure our freedom fighters would have argued. I'm sure some of you would have argued at various occasions. The point is, or what matters is how we are. As mentioned, I participate in a lot of interviews where we test potential civil servants. In those interviews, I ask tough questions like whether you should wear ghungar or torn jeans, whether you should hire a male subordinate or a female subordinate. Now, trust me, there is no right or wrong answer to this. What matters is why are you arguing for what you are arguing for? That is what is important. And one tip that I would like to give you for arguing is always approach argument from the losing side. Because if you lose an argument, you win alone. Also, argument is a chivalrous kind of conflict. It is a civil conflict. So please never confuse argument with slander. Argument is not just about effective speaking. It is also about being a good listener. You have to be a good listener to be able to argue. Now, what I propose in this house today is that we have leagues for kabaddi, we have leagues for cricket, we talk about dance competitions, we talk about music competitions, we spend so much money saving our art and culture, saving our music. How about having a debating culture in India? How about having local debating clubs where you and me can argue about our issues? Superior league or not? Reservation or not? Electoral freebies or not? Virat Kohli or Rohit? Let us decide the fate of this nation. Let us decide the policies that we want to do. How about having a prime ministerial debate, just like presidential debate in US, to get to know our leaders better? Ladies and gentlemen, great leaders are only born when they are able to debate, cut through arguments to themselves. And it is also important for all of us to self-critique. What I want to conclude here is that debating or arguing is not that one day you wake up and just start arguing with one another. It is like a marathon. You have to prepare for it. You have to research well. You have to have evidences. You have to know experiences. London still has a debating society. It is thriving. It is flourishing. Why can't we have one in India? Now that we have access to digital media so much, why not have a digital debating club? Let's create safe spaces to all the teachers, mentors, elders, parents. I request you all, let's create safe spaces where people can talk, where people can stand for what they believe in. Arguing isn't a war. It's not about winning anything. Arguing is like traveling, where you know that you have to come back home only enriched. If arguing is expanding our mindset, if arguing is aiding our learning, if arguing is making us a better citizen, is it bad to argue? I don't think so. Don't argue every time, but argue sometimes. Don't argue, if you can't argue often, argue sometimes. If you can't argue sometimes, argue at least once for yourself, because that is what we are in dire need of. I would want to leave you all with just one line which says, कितनी आजादी से हम अपनी हदों में गए, कितनी आजादी से हम अपनी हदों में गए हैं, and I would wish that all of you come out of your own shadows. Jai Hind.